When talking about Disney villains, numerous people would always refer to one being the darkest out of them all, the one that actually scares young and old for how realistic he really is, and that of course is Judge Claude Frollo, my number one Disney villain of all time. I made a couple videos in the past, but never really thought it was good enough to get my former points across, and there's just so much more to the character than I first thought. Like I said in previous videos, there has not been another Disney villain like him, nor will there ever be another one like him. He is very unique for a film that would be the darkest Disney would ever go, especially including modern Disney in that regard, which is disappointing considering how much stories they are still able to tell with these very complex characters. Frollo is just one of those villains who does it for good rather than evil, where when I say that, he justifies most of his actions in the name of God, perceiving what he finds to be holy or unholy, purging the world of sin except from within, and how he uses his own sin to justify the removal of that upon others, a hypocrite of the highest order, being a religious zealot, using that as a shield to commit the most heinous atrocities imaginable. He is the type of villain who would literally kill the other Disney villains because of how they use witchcraft and other things that his mind would actually find to be impure, and that is a scarier thought than any other characters with magical powers that could remove him with one stroke. The human element that is important to his character that many during his time, of course nowadays, do have. Something very comparable if we take a look at historical figures and dictators with men of power and just insane figures that you can find on the street if you look deep enough into a man's heart. And one can also not go without mentioning his voice, one that sounds like a figure of such immense power containing the darkness, portraying such a tyrannical, fearful figure that was portrayed by the one and only Tony Jay. He famously once said that this was the role for his bid for immortality, which judging by how much revered he is as a villain now, that remains to be the case, where he is appreciated for all time trying to portray pure evil in the physical animated form. More notably before this point, he actually portrayed Monsieur D'Arc from Beauty and the Beast, where his delivery of the role really encouraged them to cast him in this film, where funny enough, they're actually both sadist villains and are also French, making that connection a little bit more suspicious in some ways, but a testament to the type of voice he can portray. Where in fact, in an interview, he actually mentions a lot of what they tried to add to Frollo from previous Disney villains, where some say they made his role to mainly show to the audience that being a Disney villain isn't cool. You might think that they have more spice than the main characters like Cruella or Jafar or Captain Hook, but Frollo is the one to show you this is not the path you want to end up, and I really think he explains it well in this very interview.
Claude Frollo, well now, he's, we've tried to make him into a fully fleshed, three-dimensional character. A tragic figure rather than an out-and-out senseless villain. In other words, everything he does in a wicked sense is understandable but not excusable. See, Frollo, when he's trying to get his own way, tends to be arch. That's the way I see him. In other words, you could see through him, really. Because nobody trusts him. I mean, Phoebus doesn't trust him right from the word go. And Esmeralda certainly doesn't. And Quasimodo certainly knows about him. So, whatever he's trying to do, Frollo, in an attempt to get his own way and get his ambitions realized, is really transparent. We can see through him.
And knowing that, you just have to love how much depth they tried to add to his character to flesh him out to make him more real, but at the same time very truly villainous, understandable from his perspective and removing evil from the world, but definitely not agreeable in execution of all things from top to bottom. And yes, you can literally see right through his character and his heart. Esmeralda doesn't trust him from the start because of who he is and what he does to her people, Phoebus doesn't trust him because of his actions and words are too brash and too harsh and cruel, and Quasimodo only tolerates him because Frollo raised him and saved him even though he was about to kill him, teaching us that perspective is everything, where the main theme of the movie is to find out who is the monster and who is the man, and that is what we are going to start with. Because at the start, Clopin tells the young children the story of Quasimodo, well at least the part where he became the bell ringer, as it does take place at the beginning of the film, where it once again sets up the context of what happened to both of them, a night that changed both their lives forever, where we are of course introduced to Frollo's character, where you instantly get what he's actually like by the lyrics of the song being the most powerful Disney opening ever created in The Bells of Notre Dame, establishing how Clopin already knows what Frollo is like, with the line how he saw corruption everywhere except within, establishing how much he is of a hypocrite and the usage of God trying to justify his actions to purge the world, represented by him chasing down Quasimodo's mother. It's where we already see him commit to two heinous acts. First, violently grabbing Quasimodo from his mother and virtually killing her, having her hit her head on the steps, and two, almost drowning Quasimodo by taking him to the well before being stopped by the archdeacon. This already shows to the audience how dark he really is as a person, only stopped by someone in a morally higher position, that being of the church's archdeacon, who points out his crime and shows how the cathedral is actually judging him for his immoral actions and quickly changing his heart to fear for something he did. After all, the main points of his character are to project, blame others using minor details about the opposing party to justify his pursuits, and just act morally superior to others. And now, because of these actions, he has to take care of Quasimodo for a sin, where he turns it into a positive use for his own purposes, finally ending the sequence where Kloppen asks the audiences the riddle to guess if you can, to see who is the monster and who is the man. The question the movie constantly asks of you, where on the surface level the answer would be clear, but on the inside there is very much more than meets the eye. Because when you first see Quasimodo, you can already tell he is deformed, but by the way he acts and speaks, it suggests otherwise onto his character, making the answer either clear or muddled to physical meaning, reintroducing us to Frollo on the other hand with a stern hand. This is where he doses reality onto him, after finding out he was talking to his gargoyle friends who may or may not be alive. That is up for interpretation, and the weakest parts of the films anyway, that more resemble what Frollo has done, locking a boy as the bell ringer for years, manipulating him to see how the world is cruel, and how he twisted his own actions onto his mother for not caring for him when that wasn't the case. The song Out There really shows more of the contrast with Frollo, showing how much he can be trusted and no one else will, because they will laugh at him and mock him being the way that he is, because that is the way that things are in the world and needs to be corrected, where when we see him leave, he tells them it's safe enough being alone in the tower, where Quasi on the other hand longs for freedom just to revel in the public, because deep down he is a kind, gentle soul that anyone would want to be friends with. They just look at things physically, where he just doesn't ask for much because of how he was raised and just wants to live for the sake of living. Everything he does is more in favor of God than what Frollo does in any way, the important role that is always being played in showcasing the right from wrong. This also brings us later in the movie after introducing us to Phoebus to the Palace of Justice. It shows more of his monster persona after he gives instructions on how he wants to punish and torture those he deems to be disappointments, where we see of course Phoebus act with more sincerity, reporting to a higher up, but also the tinge of fear after you visibly hear this man scream.
My last captain of the guard was a bit of a disappointment to me.
The man in question is of course the previous captain of the guard to Frollo, where anyone who discussed him gets severely punished, and you can really see he loves being a sadist by the expression on his face for the torture of this poor soul. This then introduces us to the main conflict and genocidal tendencies of Frollo and his hatred of the Romani people in Paris, which I hear was a common thing amongst French people during this time in the 15th century, making it more believable and real to the character that they were trying to portray. We don't understand why he hates them fully in his background, but we actually still get it for the people of his time and his background as a religious zealot. Those who think hardly on the punishable actions of gods in the Bible that they interpret as their own need to cleanse the earth, which doesn't understand any of the actions that Jesus and God did fully when you actually think back upon their teachings, despite everything he actually thinks is doing right in this moment, where he was always going to be born with that inherent nature of sin, and has undoubtedly expressed that in his own words in the scene to root out the unheathen ways of the gypsies. He even says here, for about 20 years he has been taking care of them one by one, and plans to do one thing to stop them all, and portrayed within the ants in the stone, meaning he wants to complete full genocide of their people, showing us that this man must be stopped at all cost. And this is the moment, of course, where the Feast of Fools takes place, where Quasi sneaks down towards where he is the official of the whole event, where he watches Esmeralda for the first time being the main feature of. And from that very moment where he sees her, we see something spark inside of him. His face shocked and really cannot think, only trying to tell Phoebus that it is disgusting while completely enamored by her. And then you see her get close to him, leaving him with this purple scarf, where it represents the beginning for his character for having these feelings of lust lust for Esmeralda, a figure of immense beauty amongst the public, where it becomes this new conflict for a character who has never loved anyone in his life before, where he also gets enraged at the fact that he sees Quasi betraying his orders out there on the stage, where 1, he is angry at Quasi for disobeying him, and 2, his manipulations to get what he wants is starting to crack a bit. He's used to having these things to his advantage, and now 2 things he hates the most are right in front of him, and that's why he allows Quasi to get mocked and have food thrown at him despite his desperate pleas, just to teach him a lesson that he needs, that he was right all along about what happened, feeling sanctified for his beliefs until Esmeralda comes back in and defies him and the public for acting poor on his behalf, a moment that would shape both of their characters for their love of Esmeralda, finally escaping in the moment to the church while Frollo gets angry at Quasi directly, sending him back to the church, where we start to see the change begin. Because this is where most people point out what attracts Esmeralda to Phoebus, that we see in the end of them becoming lovers, because he sees her as a person, and how later Quasi sees her as an angel and Frollo as a devil of desire, and how that moment is clear when Frollo wants Esmeralda arrested, but Sanctuary is claimed, putting him face to face with the Archdeacon again, trying to respect the church that Frollo tries to still uphold dear above himself. And although banished outside, Frollo still sneaks up on her and grabs her and sniffs her hair in the most predatory way possible. And if you weren't on board with this character before, then you surely aren't now, because we see a creep whose lust is slowly growing greater for a woman of young beauty that most see. And this is where Esmeralda sees right through him and what he is imagining him in his fucked up head, where he immediately projects onto her that only her kind can
twist the truth to cloud the mind with unholy thoughts.
Of course, which is literally nobody else's fault but his very own. His own lust and his own desire that he declares that she will be his if she tries to leave the church out with the guards. Just everything about him just wants to take her for himself because he's let lust consume him. And then, of course, this leads us to the single greatest Disney song in history of Hellfire, because just before this point, Quasi had just freed Esmeralda from Notre Dame and shaped his angelic opinion of her, where she sees good at him where others do not, and the evil in Frollo, where we finally get to see him try to call out to Mary to proclaim that he is the righteous and holy and proud of his virtue. The most ironic line ever spoken, because of the fact he mentions pride, which of course is one of the 7 deadly sins, where humility is one of the 7 virtues, twisting that definition back and forth because he just can, because of his own actions in the past, where he describes he is confused why she sees her corrupting his thoughts, his immoral feelings for desire for her, blaming her for this because that's what he's always good at doing, not admitting any fault of his own, where when we see the robed figures appear, he keeps expressing how it's not his fault, where they shout out mea culpa and mea maxima culpa, which is Latin for my fault, my most grievous fault, that really contrasts and shows us that deep down, it really is his fault and his own undoing for this. His sin, his weakness in the flesh, that even he blames God for making the devil so much stronger than a man, which can be more interpreted and framed as asking him, why did you make us weak and susceptible to the most grievous sin tempted by the devil, still not understanding that it's his own actions that define what we do. We make the choices for ourselves throughout our own free will that determines whether we be good and stand up for what has been created and what laws that must be just, or destroy that and commit atrocities because of our own definitions that are surely destructive in nature. And apparently, this is not something he sees clear when they transform them back into the fireplace to show him being dragged into his eventual fate if he does not stop. It's a moment where he asks Maria for protection, where all of a sudden a bright white light appears to show a guard telling that Esmeralda is gone, which of course represents the path from above wants him to take, the light that says stop, she is gone now, and end this before it is too late. But then he just says this:
Get out, you idiot. I'll find her. I'll find her if I have to burn down all of Paris.
Here is where he fully commits to Esmeralda and his lust being too great for him to control, diving into the fire, burning the scarf. She will be his or burn forever, where now it is already too late for him to go back, and he has surely cursed himself for all of eternity, where you only see one bit and a faint glimpse of what he knows his doing is wrong, asking God for mercy on both her and himself for what he is about to do, somehow realizing that what he is about to do is wrong, as the chorus of Hellfire gradually rises and ends with this powerful note, and various spirits with crosses come out, reaffirming, Lord have mercy on him, because he will burn. And in the next scene when Phoebus sees him, you can tell he had trouble sleeping, but it also notifies you of his demonic change that makes him go after every gypsy in the city, burning homes and people who stashed them away, sending them to prison for their own misdeeds, and just ransacking their homes just for the sake of it. The most horrifying situation that causes Phoebus to interact and save a family that was going to be executed by Frollo for allegedly harboring Romani people, even though that was not the case at all, where because of that refusal, he declares him a traitor and has him executed, although Esmeralda buys him time to escape in a somewhat apparent death. No matter how hard people like Phoebus try to point out these immoral actions, Frollo does not care because he has already sealed his fate to what he wants to do. He's already not caring of what anyone thinks of him, even that pertaining to God himself, where he just wants Esmeralda no matter what happened because he already doomed himself. This also leads him back to Quasimodo as the only one who could have helped her escape the tower, finally deducing the truth once he sees his figure on his models trying to manipulate Quasi once again about love and how people like her are not capable of doing so, and the blame game continues on, where his own actions for burning the city is put on him because he let her get away when he did not want that.
But I know all Paris is burning because of you.
But of course, thinking back upon his mother calms him a bit in a state of regret that had him locate himself in. The glimpse of sanity that re-entered his mortal soul, pulling himself out of the momentous state that their pain will be done, to free them of both her evil spell by burning her, knowing where these gypsies hide in order to free him of her lust, and to keep Quasi where he belongs in his opinion. No thoughts of freedom or wanting more out of life anymore. So while it is true there is a glimpse of sanity, it is very brief so that he could continue his own heinous ways from that very perspective. And at the same time he holds Esmeralda, you also see him get to knock down his own figure, his own miniature figure that Quasi created, representing that she is actually the downfall of him, as we see later on in the film. This is where we find him finally capturing the Court of Miracles, faintly thanking Quasi for helping him out by finding it, and capturing Phoebus and Esmeralda once again, staring intently at Quasi to keep him locked up high up on the bell tower from interfering with his own goals. And as we see, he has also locked up all of the Romani people and Phoebus, holding Esmeralda to burn her at the stake in front of them, in front of everyone who actually now hates him because he destroyed their homes and ransacked their city with his tyrannical power he holds. This is also where he gives her a choice, the choice to give in to his lustful desires or burn for all of eternity.
Choose me or the fire.
Which of course she chooses death instead, as anything would actually be better than to submit to a sadistic creep who thinks he is right. And this is where you think he is on the cusp of victory because Quasi at the moment refused to do anything until the last second, where then this actually changes him after noticing what is in Frollo's art for the first time. It's a moment where both physically and mentally Quasi actually breaks the chain that Frollo held over him over a long period of time and swings down to rescue Esmeralda, infuriating Frollo and changing him once again for the worse, trying to seize the cathedral where before this point he usually would never dare touch or destroy that, representing the Most High, where I like to see that this is the scene where he loses his hat, is where he truly loses any sense that made him human, going after both Quasi and Esmeralda to rid him of any dread in his life anymore with serious intent. The same time that the public starts to push back and riot against Frollo's guards to take back what's theirs from his oppression. And when Quasi pours down the molten copper from the church is where you get to see that shield that separates him from everyone else. The gates of hell personally opening up for him for what he is trying to do, still going after his goal no matter what, now disrespecting the archdeacon by throwing him down, where usually before this he respected him as a representative of God, but now knowing it is too late for his soul to be redeemed at all, so now he acts with no consequences. And this is a perfect moment to strike where now he can end them both forever and rid him of his suffering guilt. But just before that, Quasi actually realizes this and overpowers him and turns the tables on him to put the fear back into him, because after all, that is what he was always capable of doing so. But knowing Frollo, he was just so good at the blame game and manipulation, where only at the 11th hour he gets desperate when situation turns against him finally, realizing how weak and fragile he is as a person, only putting his sword out when Esmeralda lives and going on this chase. And lots of people like to point out that by this point, he stopped calling Quasi by his name, calling him a hunchback, revealing his true feelings about him and anyone at this point, calling the archdeacon an old fool, Quasimodo a hunchback, and of course Esmeralda in his eyes as a witch. It's like the devil at this point has fully corrupted him of all purpose, and with the fires below outside, you can truly see what is happening to him in his eyes, revealing the truth to Quasi because he doesn't care anymore. The devil taking full control. Like in real life, all it takes is a single moment to turn someone into a monster, and that's why Frollo's journey as a villain works so well. But even now when he tries to drag him down, he falls too because of his cape, but Quasi actually at the moment wouldn't actually let go of him, representing the goodness of his heart despite Frollo's helpful actions. The man and the monster of the movie has never been clearer by this point, where Frollo swings back up while Esmeralda tries to save him using the gargoyle to climb back up, where you see his demon eyes and he laughs as he finally gets the chance to kill her before it crumbles and he falls once again. Many say that this scene where the gargoyle lights up could be his hallucination to show the gargoyle coming to life, filling him with fear, or real divine intervention from God himself or anyone up high, where no matter what, he had certainly chosen his fate for eternal punishment in the fires of hell below, plunging into the fiery pit with no visible body as if he was transported to hell forever. A satisfying end to a satisfying evil character who had many attempts to redeem himself but chose not to, indulging in the most righteous to commit unrighteous acts. Frollo represents what happens when one does not accept their own sin or flaws in their lives and justifies that in others to get what he wants the most. He does want to be saved, but demonstrates traits not worthy of being saved. Everything he does is acted out of fear and disgust for perceived wickedness, just being those inherent bad traits that humans are born with, that causes these actions where without reflection, you will not be able to notice that, and that's why he's Disney's most scariest and darkest villain, because he is human, being the type you derive the most being a monster, while the monster is really the man, and that's why this movie worked the way it did for me. Where of course today, it is a no-brainer why he's revered high up upon Disney villainy to this day, because of how real he is compared to the others, which really fits his character being the one who really hates the others supposedly doing morally righteous acts. Everything about him elevates Disney villains on another level that Disney refused to do in this age, which breaks my heart considering their diminished track record overall, which I hope the new ones are sure to impress, but that is surely to be seen, and in that regard, Frollo will always remain to be number one in that case. And with that said, I'm all done, so goodbye.